Hello, everybody. This is GeorgeAnn, and this is the Byte Show. And we are very, very blessed to have Joseph Farrell with us. And we're going to talk tonight about LBJ and the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. And it's kind of an honorarium for our slain president, our murdered president. Joseph, when they murdered him, they killed the soul of this country.
Hi, GeorgeAnn.
Hi.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, they did. And you know, I've been getting all sorts of emails from people asking, when are you going to talk about it? And I responded to some of them and said that we had an interview scheduled. It's tomorrow is Friday, the 50th anniversary of the murder.
Yes.
And it's interesting that the 50th anniversary falls on the same day that the assassination occurred, on a Friday.
Yep.
Which I remember so well because I was homesick from school. And, my mom was watching. I remember everything. And she was watching her soap opera, and I was kind of laying on the floor being sick and watching. And then CBS broke into As the World Turns. I remember very, very well. And the story began to break. But, they murdered the soul of the country. And, the reason it's still important, the reason that people have to keep investigating and, paying no attention to these idiots that are put forward every now and then about, there's no conspiracy.
Yeah.
The mainstream media is still pushing this nonsense.
Yeah, oh boy.
And people have to keep investigating and exposing this whole thing, because there's something that there's two general things that have been happening. One is that an author by the name of Peter Janney put it very well in a book that he wrote on the Kennedy assassination, that the American experiment in democracy died that day.
Yes.
We have since had a theater of, political process.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, it has been increasingly corrupted. We've had a succession of poodles and sock puppets for presidents since then. We've had basically the entire political party system co-opted.
Yeah.
And endless wars in support of the military-industrial financial complex or oligarchy. We have exhausted, I think, our moral capital around the world as a result.
Yes.
The financial corruption that Kennedy may have been able to do something about had he lived and perhaps finished out not only his first administration but gone on to a second term. The financial corruption is what we see now.
Yes.
The banks that are too big to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bad part. The good part is that I think it also began a process that, due to the birth of the Internet, has accelerated dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. But people have to look back and understand what it took for the early researchers to expose the fraud, the cover-up, the lie.
Yes.
There were very, very few people. They had to work out of a non-indexed Warren report, going to interview people, and it was a very, very small handful of people, GeorgeAnn, that exposed the thing, were made fun of course, ridiculed, belittled. But look where we are today. We are to the point where most Americans no longer believe not only that lie, but in the process of uncovering the Kennedy fraud, people realized that most of the scandals since have been the result of the corruption, the coup d'etat that took power.
Yes.
And the playbook isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, they wanted their war in Syria,
Mm-hmm.
and, I think that was a major turning point.
Well, now they're trying to go after Iran.
Well, they're trying, but my point is that you're missing my point. My point is that they didn't get away with it in Syria. The old playbook fell apart.
Yes.
And I think that was a real turning point of some sort. I don't know where it's going to end, but I think it's for all of these reasons that we have to keep on the Kennedy assassination until a picture begins to emerge, and that's really kind of the final thing, GeorgeAnn, I think we have to look at. It's now almost universally agreed by most Kennedy assassination researchers that Lyndon Baines Johnson stood in the center of a vast web of conspiracy and was himself involved, at least, at the minimum, as an accessory after the fact, orchestrating a cover-up. And in my opinion, he was involved prior to that in the planning and execution of the whole thing. So,
well, Joseph, LBJ told Earl Warren that because of Oswald's visit to the Russian and Cuban consulates, there was a danger of nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union and Cuba. What a liar!
Yeah, it was totally over the top.
Yeah.
There was no such thing at all. There was no such danger at all. The Soviets weren't about to do anything under those charged circumstances that existed after the assassination.
Yeah.
And I don't think the American people would have gone along with anything had anything like that been tried.
Yeah.
So LBJ is really the first post-coup d'etat president. He knows about the coup d'etat. He planned it. He helped it along. He covered it up afterwards.
Yes.
And benefited from the transference of power that occurred. And of course, he personally, this is what people forget. At that time, I well remember it because, even though as a kid I didn't really understand what was going on, I understood the anger in my father's voice when they were playing cards at the kitchen table with their friends, talking about Billy Sol Estes and the corruption that surrounded him, and of course that broke out just before the assassination. And of course, Billy Sol Estes was a very, very close confidant, business associate of Lyndon Baines Johnson, and that whole thing would have erupted in Johnson's face, and the Kennedys, of course, were planning to get rid of him as the vice president on the second administration. Anyway, so the assassination occurred at just the right time for Johnson to skate away from the scandals that were beginning to engulf him. And then, of course, as president, he used the power of the presidency to put any further investigation into those personal affairs of his, on the back burner, as well as to orchestrate the cover-up of the assassination itself. So, this is a man, GeorgeAnn, that really initiates publicly the process of corruption and sleaze that has, engulfed American politics ever since.
Yep.
So for all these reasons, I think the Kennedy assassination has to remain center stage for those that investigate political conspiracy. Everything since then, GeorgeAnn, and I do mean everything. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Mena, Arkansas, BCCI, New Gone Hand, Savings and Loan Scandal, Waco, all of this stuff that has occurred since then has, in my opinion, some deep link to the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And it may seem like going way out of the way to say that some of the terrorist operations do, but when you look at the fact that many of these terrorist operations are false flag events orchestrated by NATO covert operations units.
False flags.
Well, false flags. But this strategy really became part of NATO's operational strategy under a NATO chief by the name of George Lyman Lemnitzer.
Yeah.
Well, if you know who Lemnitzer was, he was the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman until Kennedy dismissed him and sent him to exile over to Europe. So, you know, the connections to the Kennedy assassination just don't stop. And that's one thing that the critics, the so-called skeptics, I call them hired guns. You know, these people really haven't said anything new. They present no real scholarship. They present no real arguments. They get on the lamestream media. They write books that become major sellers because they can promote them on their talking head shows, and then National Geographic makes movies out of them.
Yeah.
All this nonsense. The problem that these skeptics have is that the Kennedy assassination is a huge conspiracy. I mean, the very size of it, the people involved. But, you know, we were warned that it was huge and that people really wouldn't believe how huge it was by Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, he ought to know.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm laughing. I have to tell you a little kind of side story here, GeorgeAnn.
Okay.
After our last interview, where I had basically a whole day of just completely not being able to function because I was forgetting.
I remember, and I got emails about that.
Oh, I have too. But today I did my news and views, and today I seem to be suffering from some sort of oracular dyslexia because
oh no.
Because I referred to the Texas School Book Depository as the Texas School Book Suppository.
Oh no.
So, some lady wrote me and she said, "That's gotta hurt." You know?
Yeah.
So I responded and said, "Yes, it does."
Oh goodness.
But anyway, to get back to the serious part of it, your statement that it killed the soul of the country, I think, is true. At least it maimed it.
Yeah.
And it's so spiritually important for the country, spiritually and culturally, that we step up to the plate and look at the fact that the conspirators were allowed to get away with murder.
Yes.
And we've got to step up to the plate and acknowledge the fact that what has been done in the name of the people of this country since then, with the killing and the wars and the false flag operations and the whole putrid, corrupt cesspool that the powers that be that rule this country have used and are now finding that it don't work anymore. The whole thing has to be lanced. It's a big, ugly boil.
It's a cancer.
It is.
And not only did they get rid of him, they murdered his brother.
They murdered
and his
King.
son.
Yeah, his son.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Yeah, that's something that I did a couple weeks ago. A series of blogs on some of the assassination effects or the consequences that are still with us. And yeah, I'm definitely of the opinion that his son, John Kennedy Jr., was also murdered.
Yes.
There are persisting rumors, GeorgeAnn, and I'm inclined, even though I haven't researched them very deeply, I'm inclined to put a lot of credence into them, that John Kennedy Jr. had privately investigated aspects of his father's murder.
Oh, yeah.
And that, at that time, he had founded his own magazine called George.
Yeah.
And that he was going to expose the whole thing, or at least expose what he had uncovered in some of his private investigation. So, there's no doubt that people continue to die because of the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
Which can only mean, GeorgeAnn, that the same structure, the same coalescence of interests, as I call it in the book, is still there.
Yes.
And still in place, and still is threatened by the truth.
Yes, very much so. Look at it opened the door for all this corporate gargantuan garbage and these endless wars and just so much murder.
Yeah.
Oh my God! And Joseph.
Yeah, Kennedy. I think Kennedy was coming to the realization that the national security structure had grown to the point that if something wasn't done to stop it,
yes,
that it was going to eat away, like all cancers do, until the host itself was killed. And that's really the danger that we see happening now.
Yes, it is.
And the problem people have to guard against is overreacting against that structure. Because there's now, a great deal of pressure on the United States, and this would not be a good time to be weak.
Yeah.
So I hate to disappoint those people that think we should just come right out and dismantle the whole thing right away, lock, stock, and barrel. The whole national security structure. I don't think that would be wise or prudent, but. By the same token, something has to be done to root out the poison.
Yes.
And I have no easy solutions between those two hard places. There really isn't any easy solution to it. But you're right. The assassination ushered in an era of wars and corporate corruption, and it's just been a nonstop theater of a kind of a black comedy since then.
Yeah. Oh boy, Joseph. I mean, for LBJ to tell Earl Warren such a fantastic lie. Oh my God, it's just over the top.
Well, but you've got to understand, for Earl Warren to believe it.
Yeah.
The real point, I think, is that the Warren Commission, with maybe the exception of Warren himself and one or two other people on it, was such a setup job to begin with, because, like I point out in the book, everybody on that commission represented at least one, if not several, of the factional interests that most researchers find involved in the assassination. So it was a put up job from the get go, and the only one that could have orchestrated something like that was Lyndon Johnson himself.
Yeah.
Because he had the goods on most of those people anyway. So, gee. The sleaze factor has never quite been as low as it was under Lyndon Johnson. Anyway.
Well, I remember sitting in a hotel lobby talking with someone by the last name of Schiff.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Johnson, there's a hotel room, he said, down in Houston where they get together, they drink, they play cards, and he said they figure out how they're going to rule the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's not altogether unlikely, because as I pointed out in the book, the Texas oil men had their own kind of delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
The Murchisons and the Hunts and so on. They ran their own private intelligence service, and this is an aspect. And people today, especially, I've been getting all sorts of angry emails from people saying, well, you think the Nazis were part of this whole thing, and you're just an idiot, you're a fool, yada, yada, yada. It was really the Jews, it was really the Israelis, so on and so forth.
Not in the Kennedy deal.
Well, whether it's true or not, at least read my book, people, to find out why I say things other than just react to something that you see on YouTube.
Yeah.
But the Texas oilmen had their private intelligence, and as I pointed out in the book, that private intelligence that so many researchers have uncovered, they don't ask whose it was. Well, it was General Galen,
yeah.
the Nazi guy that was head of West German intelligence after the war. So, there's part of your Nazi connection right there. I believe that George de Mohrenschildt, who's one of the shadier characters that's on the periphery of the assassination and who actually introduces Oswald into the circles of the white Russian community there in Dallas.
Yeah.
Just stop and ponder that one for a moment. The white Russian community in Dallas, particularly at that time, was very right-wing in its politics.
Mm-hmm.
The White Russians had been eager, to a certain extent, recruits and volunteers for the SS during World War II.
Yeah.
And, they were no friends of the communist regime. So what are they doing taking in this defector, to the Soviet Union? And moreover, one with a Russian wife who is the daughter of a colonel in Soviet military intelligence.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Oh boy.
So de Mohrenschildt, I've always suspected, since he was from White Russia himself, that he was somehow part of the network that was running Oswald inside of the Soviet Union. I've gone on record, unlike most people, in saying that the network running him inside of the Soviet Union ostensibly is the CIA,
yeah,
but the actual boots on the ground doing so for the CIA is General Galen's outfit.
Oh.
So, there's any number of ways you spin all of this, GeorgeAnn, but the bottom line, it always comes back to who had the power, who had the capability of orchestrating the post-assassination cover-up and putting out such a ridiculous cover story.
Yeah.
And there's really only one person ultimately that you can look at, and that's Lyndon Johnson.
Yep. Well, Joseph, there were a total of 7 bullets that hit not only Connolly, but the president. And from the school depository building, I had to be careful there.
Yes.
If you're shooting down on somebody like that, it creates a different effect than was done. Your head would slump forward, not fly back.
Well, the whole thing with the Zapruder film, that's, I spent, as you know in the book, a lot of time with the Zapruder film.
Yes.
Because that film was so badly doctored anyway, that its evidentiary value is almost nil. But yes, in the original version of the film, you do see him being pushed violently and suddenly backward rather than forward. So, which is consonant with the kinetic energy of a, high velocity bullet hitting somebody. But, the other problem that you mentioned there, and it's worth pointing out, is you mentioned 7 bullets. Well, no one really knows exactly how many bullets there are. However, the problem is that there are fragments of bullets that hit Charles Tague, who's standing under the overpass.
Yes.
Clear on the other side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
Some bullets actually nicked the curb, and he pointed this out to some policemen. Then, more recently, one of the nurses that was in Parkland Hospital, where the president was taken after the shooting, described a bullet that was lodged in the president's neck.
Yes.
That was about 1.5 inches long with a point to it rather than the blunt nose bullets that were used in the Mannlicher Carcano and that were put as evidence by the Warren Commission. So in other words, she's describing a very different bullet from a very different weapon
yes.
than that lousy Italian thing with the misaligned gun sight. Oswald supposedly pulled off this stunning feat of marksmanship in 6.5 seconds or whatever it was. So there's that. And then there's the fact that this nurse also describes shrapnel wounds on the front of the president.
Yes.
Well, you can't get shrapnel wounds on the front of the president if everything is all the shots are coming from behind.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no way, folks, in an honest court of opinion, that
key
these people,
word being honest.
Honest, yeah. The talking heads, the people that are trying to say there was no conspiracy.
Yeah.
They used to be in that camp, but now they've seen the light and they've embraced the truth. Well, as far as I'm concerned, GeorgeAnn, some of those people may be honest and legitimate, but I honestly think that to embrace a position like that, you have to be willfully ignorant and blind.
Yeah.
That you're entering into the spiritual consequences of what was done, and that's all important here.
You better believe it is. Oh. And the people that covered this all up have got some heavy spiritual consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
my God.
Let's look at the fact that, and I pointed this out in my news and views earlier today, let's look at the fact that the United States government actually has two, and not only two, but two mutually contradictory official explanations of what happened.
Oh.
There's the Warren report, of course, with, the lone nut in his school book depository accomplishing feats of marksmanship with his Mannlicher Carcano rifle with a misaligned telescope. And then we have the House Committee on Assassinations in the 1970s. We have the Senate Church Committee in the 1970s that was chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho.
Yeah.
And all of the things that they uncovered, these two committees uncovered, and they basically came to the tentative conclusion that they could not rule out a conspiracy.
Oh, dear.
So, which is it? Well, it's interesting to me, GeorgeAnn, that the executive branch of the federal government, you will never hear a post-Kennedy president coming out with any other possible explanation other than the Warren report.
Right.
The only exception to that, interestingly enough, was Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
He gave an interview for CBS News where he actually originally went on the record as saying that, he thought maybe there could have been a conspiracy, and then he called CBS News back and asked them not to air that little part of the segment.
Oh.
You can actually go on YouTube and find it. Yeah. And of course, even then, Johnson is pointing the finger at everybody but himself. But at least he's willing to say, well, maybe there was a conspiracy. But he's the only one. So in other words, it's the Warren report, with all of its problems, is still the de facto position of the executive branch.
Yes.
Which means that the same people are pressuring whoever holds that office not to deviate off the reservation.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the medical staffers at Parkland saw different things than what the medical staffers at Bethesda saw. And why were all these people, politicians, standing in the room when they were trying to work on the president?
Oh, well, that's, again, I spent a lot of time with that in the book as well, because you really have a situation, GeorgeAnn, where there are two different pathology reports.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put it. The doctors at Parkland Hospital, you're quite correct, are describing wounds that are sound like entrance wounds from the front.
Yes.
They are consistent with shots fired from the front and not very consistent with shots fired from the rear.
Right.
And then, you're correct. By the time you get to Bethesda Naval Hospital,
oh boy,
there appears to be a complete change in the description of the wounds.
Yes.
And this has led some people to speculate that there had to have been some surgery performed post-mortem on the president, either in Dallas or during the transit from Dallas to Washington, D.C.
I think it was done in transit.
It may have been. Who knows? But whatever the truth may be, there were, wounds were altered so that no official conclusion could be made at Bethesda other than what the doctors had been steered. And even then, the doctors were describing things inconsistent. And you're right, there's people in the room, military brass and so on, that are interfering with the performance of this autopsy.
Yeah.
And then the final coup de grace is when the Bethesda autopsy surgeon who had no experience in conducting for any sort of forensic pathology on top of everything else, when he goes before the Warren Commission, he does not bring his medical notes and photographs. He brings basically what amount to cartoon drawings.
Yeah.
So the whole autopsy angle itself, which would be the crucial piece of evidence to establish a conspiracy, is itself doctored. That we have, in other words, the suppression and alteration of evidence, which is a felony crime.
Well, Joseph, the guys at Bethesda said they didn't see the wound in the front of the president's head.
Right.
And that's an outright lie.
Yeah, because this is something that was described by the doctors at Parkland and
yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
So yeah, it's not necessarily a lie, GeorgeAnn, because that may have been really what the Bethesda doctors saw. So in other words, they may have been accurately reporting a post-surgery. That's my point here, and that's what one researcher thinks, is that the doctors at Bethesda weren't lying. They are describing what they genuinely saw. So there was an alteration in the body at some point between Dallas and Washington.
Well, my God, Joseph, the guys at Bethesda handle war victims.
Yeah,
are soldiers, and they see wounds, terrible wounds.
But you must remember something, GeorgeAnn. The surgeons at Bethesda, we weren't at war at that time. The surgeons at Bethesda conducting the autopsy were not forensic pathologists. So, let's not be too hard on them. They are responding to a situation that the evidence has already been doctored. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And their conflict with the doctors in Dallas doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It simply means that there has been an alteration in the body at some point between A and B. And that's even far worse. Because again, who has access to the body? Who has access to the equipment and so on and so forth to alter the wounds in such a way that the doctors in Bethesda are going to come to different conclusions than the ones in Dallas.
Well, Joseph, if somebody shoots me in the front of my head, it would be obvious.
Well, yeah.
Even if they did a close up on it.
You have to mangle the evidence in such a way that it becomes impossible for the attending physicians to figure out what the heck is going on.
Oh God.
So we don't know where this was done, or even really if it was done, although the evidence itself, if you look at it carefully and closely, suggests that it was. This may be the reason why it's, next to impossible to figure out what happened to the president's brain, or what remained of it.
Yeah.
You just, this is yet another area where anyone maintaining the idea that there's no real conspiracy here, I mean, you have to be willfully blind to ignore all this.
Yes.
How do you function and get on TV in front of millions of viewers selling your book in the recent National Geographic movie with a straight face?
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
You got to be a psychopath.
Well, either that, or they're paying you a lot of money, or you're under threat of some sort. The point here is that the Kennedy assassination is also showing the mainstream corporate media up for the front job, the shills that it really is. They're pushing a story that the vast amount of people have abandoned, and they're going to keep pushing it until their media empires disappear.
Yeah. I like the way you put that.
Yeah, it's going to be the fairy tale of the next millennium. I'm quite certain. But it's going to be an example of the Goebbels-like propaganda machine that the American corporate media became in the late 20th century and on into the first part of the 21st century.
Yeah.
And when I say Goebbels-like propaganda machine, that's exactly what I mean.
You're not kidding. Yeah. I forget who it was. I think Thompson showed a photo of a CE-399, which he denied that it was the bullet he gave to the Secret Service.
Well, what's a CE-399?
It is a round-nosed, military-jacketed, copper-coated bullet.
Okay.
And, this stuff none of it jives.
No, none of it does. The other problem is there also is a discrepancy describing the alleged murder weapon itself.
Yes.
When the Dallas deputies show up there at the 6th floor of the school book depository and discover the sniper's nest, the initial reports of the weapon that was found was that it was a Mauser.
Oh, dear.
It wasn't even an Italian weapon at all. It was a German weapon.
Yeah.
And then somehow between that and later on in the day, it gets changed to the Mannlicher Carcano. And it's like I point out in my book, is somebody trying to tell us something here? At first we have a German gun and then an Italian gun.
Yeah.
All we're missing is a Japanese gun, and the axis would be complete. But there's that discrepancy. Are we to say that the Dallas deputies didn't know a Mauser when they saw it?
Oh gosh.
On and on this goes. So it doesn't surprise me that there's shifting bullets that, I just learned about this nurse who's describing a pointed bullet rather than the blunt-nosed bullet.
Yeah.
On and on it goes.
Well, that pointed bullet could sure do a lot of damage.
Well, the other problem is, if you look at the Zapruder film, which I don't like to do because I just,
It hurts.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But when you see the president's head in some of these frames literally explode, and brain matter flying out the back of the exit wound, there's no way you get that effect simply with the solid bullets that the Warren Commission is showing us. You'd use a frangible bullet. You'd use a bullet that's designed deliberately once it impacts with the target. defragment into several pieces
Yeah.
and just rip the target apart and cause the most damage possible. So, and if your target is the president, you want to make good and sure he's dead. So
boy.
I hate to put it so grisly, but that would be the thinking. So even the bullets that were being shown are likely not the kind of bullets that were being used.
Yeah.
This is the other problem. So,
well, who shot up Connolly?
Well, that shot did come from behind, I think, but it's certainly not the magic bullet thing. He
was hit, I think, 3 times, Joseph.
Well, he was hit from his back shoulder, and then the bullet exited and hit his wrist, and then ended up in his left leg, I believe. Again, Connolly's words there, and I go back and forth on whether or not Governor Connolly was involved. He certainly seems like the amiable gentleman, older gentleman on TV in his later years giving interviews on the assassination. But the point is, at the time of the assassination, prior to it, his behavior is very peculiar.
Well, isn't there video proof that he ducked down before the bullets all started flying?
No, again, you have to be very careful of videos, GeorgeAnn. The sequence of frames in videos can be altered so that, and this is very clearly the case what happened in the Zapruder film. There's different versions of the Zapruder film out there, and people have to be, I spent a great deal of time talking about that in the book. In a court of law, an eyewitness's testimony would take precedence over any film because of the fact that you can doctor film. So in other words, film becomes something to corroborate an eyewitness, not the other way around.
Yeah.
All right? Now, Connolly, the standard story is that he's hit, and his wife, Nell, as his lung collapses, he goes down in her lap, and she kind of covers him up. But for me, GeorgeAnn, the interesting thing about Connolly is what he says as he's struck. And here's all of this gunshot going off.
What did he say?
He says, "Oh my God, they're going to kill us all."
Oh.
Now, listen to what he just said.
Yeah.
In a court of law, that kind of statement, because it's being said without thought and under pressure, under duress, that kind of statement is given very, very high credibility, all right?
Mm-hmm.
He says, and let me repeat it, "Oh my God, they're going to kill us all."
They are going to.
They, plural.
Yes.
Now, why does Connolly say this? He's later asked about this statement. And his response at the time was to say that, he'd been in combat and he was accustomed to the sound of multiple gunshots coming from different points. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it could also be the statement of someone who realized that there was more than one person involved because they were involved in the planning of it.
Yeah.
So, on and on we could go. How many little details do we have to pile up before we can convince the people speaking for the major media or claiming to have had conversions from a conspiracy view to the lone nut Warren Commission report view?
Yeah.
These people, again, GeorgeAnn, they are in a situation that I think they have to be either willfully ignorant or blind, or
protecting
something
the paycheck.
Something much darker. I cannot see how anyone who's done just even a little bit of research can come away from the Kennedy assassination with any other conclusion that's a reasonable conclusion other than conspiracy of some sort.
Wow.
You don't have to agree with me or the people that think it was basically and mainly the mafia, or the people that think it was basically and mainly disgruntled Cubans, or people that think it was basically and mainly the intelligence services. You know, basically, I think it's a mixture of all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
I think basically everybody that's involved in the deep politics or the deep state in this country was involved at some point in the planning and execution of this thing.
Well, it smacks of military, you know.
Well, of course it does. You know, there is a military role in it because, quite simply, local military Army counterintelligence wasn't called in.
Yeah.
Which, according to the protocol for presidential security, would have been done.
Yeah.
You know, that right there should tell everybody it's an inside job. Because, you know, again, Oliver Stone's movie JFK is a good movie in that it manages to present the basic problems with the whole thing as presented by, you know, the Warren Report and its defenders. Because towards the end of Act 1, as it were, if you're watching the DVD version of Stone's movie, the section with Donald Sutherland.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sutherland says, you know, his character says that the Secret Service would never have allowed open windows in high-rise buildings to be open on the motorcade. That is right there a basic violation of security protocols.
And didn't they change the course of the motorcade?
Yes, again, you know, and I pointed this out in the book, and you're quite right, that turn from Main Street onto Houston, and then the turn in front of the book depository onto Elm. If you've been to Dealey Plaza, you'll know that all three of those streets end up at the same place, and they all get you on the Stemmons Freeway. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So why make that turn? Well, security protocol for presidential motorcades at that time, you could not slow down lower than 40 miles an hour.
Mm.
So in other words, they violated the protocol right there with that right-hand turn onto Houston and then a sharp left-hand greater than 90-degree turn onto Elm.
Oh, boy.
So they were, in other words, they were slowing the limousine down so that the marksman, you know, had a better shot.
God.
Yeah, so, you know, how many things do we have to pile up before the shills in the mainstream media and the shills in government defending this monstrous lie, this fairy tale, will wake up and say, yeah, it was a conspiracy.
Yeah.
You know, all of these things, the security violations alone means that somebody on the inside had to have exerted pressure. It had to be somebody fairly high up to exert the pressure to make sure that all of these security precautions were overridden on that day.
Yeah.
So, you know, it goes on, GeorgeAnn.
And the FBI and the CIA monitored Jim Garrison's office.
Oh, yeah, they bugged it.
Yeah.
You know?
God.
And again, what does that tell you? There's no end of it, you know, and there's aspects of the assassination I didn't even get to in the book. You know, the whole business with Marilyn Monroe, the business with Mary Pinchot Meyer, and all of the other things that surround it. We would be here all night and probably the rest of the year if we were to go over every last detail. It is so huge and so sweeping. But the really intriguing thing, GeorgeAnn, is, you know, going back to Jack Ruby for a minute. Mm-hmm. He not only warned people, GeorgeAnn, that this was an assassination conspiracy that was so large people really wouldn't even begin to understand how large it really was. Mm-hmm. But he also said that it was going to bring in or usher in a whole new form of government.
Well, he was right.
And he was right. Yeah, he was absolutely right.
My God.
And this wasn't someone, just talking off the cuff. This was someone that was involved at some level in the whole thing, or at least had heard of what was going on through the grapevine.
And Oswald really didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, I'm not going to go that far. That was kind of Garrison's position, but I do think it's very clear that Oswald had some connection to American intelligence.
Well, yeah.
And that means he had something to do with it. Now, he may not have been he may not have been criminally involved, which is what I think you mean.
Yes.
I tend to that view myself. I think that
he was a patsy.
Well, he himself says this, but I think that he realized that that's what he had stepped into at some point prior to him going to the Texas theater, where he was eventually apprehended.
Yeah.
I think probably at some point after the assassination and before he made his way to the Texas theater, he contacted his contact, and he was told to go there and meet, and that's how the Dallas police were able to be there in such force and apprehend him, because that's where he was expecting to meet his contact, and instead he was betrayed.
Yeah.
That's you just cannot. You cannot possibly make this stuff up, folks. And you either have to believe this is a conspiracy or a long line of bumbling Keystone Cops coincidences. And I'm sorry for all of you on faux news pushing your books and your movies and all of this. I'm sorry. I don't. To ask me to believe that is an irrationality, and it's a form of willful ignorance that's ultimately dishonest.
Yeah, it really is. It's like the BS that they put out about 9/11.
Well, exactly. Exactly. Not just the BS about 9/11, but the BS about Waco, the BS about Ruby Ridge, the BS, it's been a long line of BS ever since really the end of World War II, but the Kennedy assassination is where the BS steps center stage.
Oh, yeah.
And takes power openly and directly, and has maintained the theater and show of functioning political institutions. But it ended there.
Well, look what we got today, Joseph. It's so
Precisely.
pathetic.
The consequence of the Kennedy assassination is, Catherine Austin Fitts said it best. She gave an interview herself tonight with an author by the name of Janney that wrote a very interesting book about the Kennedy assassination and Mary Pinchot Meyer and her place in it.
Yeah.
And Secretary Fitts put it best. Kennedy was the last real president.
Yeah.
The last one to seize the power of the office and attempt to use it.
Yes.
The rest since then have been more or less sock puppets with declining power. You can see the power of the presidency and the power of the character of the people occupying that office decline. I mean, just look at the last three presidents we've had. Yeah. Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama.
Yeah. What?
And the circus of corruption has increasingly become worse with each one. Why is the Kennedy assassination important? For all of the above reasons.
Oh, yeah.
And the cultural and spiritual effect of those defending the official story. To be willfully blind has a cultural effect. If people in that high position And let's look at something else, GeorgeAnn. Let's look at the impact that the assassination had on people of power at that time.
Okay.
If you're watching, if you're a powerful Wall Street banker that's not involved in the conspiracy, or you're a powerful Washington lobbyist that's not involved in the conspiracy, or a general, or what have you, and you see clearly a murder that is also clearly the result of a conspiracy paraded on public TV, and then the alleged assassin himself also murdered on public TV,
yeah,
by a low-level mobster.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gee.
And then you see the charade of the Warren report.
Yeah.
If you see all that, are you going to be inclined to act with character and with courage? No. So in a certain sense, the impetus for corruption and cowardice and mediocrity in high places begins with the Kennedy assassination. I mean, we certainly had mediocrity before that. I mean, think of Warren Harding.
Yeah.
I'm all for those mediocre presidents that have no grand visions or ideas,
Yeah.
because they do the least amount of harm. This is why I'm trying to start the Millard Fillmore Presidential Memorial, so that we can honor mediocrity that has truly done nothing.
Yeah.
Either, and thus hasn't harmed the people of the country.
Yeah.
But no, to return to the serious point, it's the assassination that brings this long line of sock puppets. Look at the leaders of the Senate today. Do we find an Everett Dirksen among them? No. Do we find a Hubert Humphrey among them? No. We don't find any character or honor or honesty or even intelligence.
Yeah.
We find a sleazebag like Harry Reid.
Yeah. And he is
a sleazebag.
A warmongering sleazebag.
A warmongering sleazebag on top of it.
Yeah.
It's so important for people, if they haven't read anything on the Kennedy assassination, to do so.
Oh,
I mean, this is our history. We will not fix this system if we cannot face the corruption and the lie. The first step to getting better is to admit you've got a problem.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
We've got a problem.
We certainly do, Joseph. And I hate to say this, but I don't see it getting better anytime soon. They're going wild with their warring and building bases and just.
Yeah, it's one thing that worries me is I think that they realize they've got to revise their playbook, because the old one just isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, again, Syria was very important. That whole thing fell apart. They really didn't even get past home plate, and
thanks to Russia.
That, and I think the pressure at home that the people were not buying it.
Yeah.
The whole story, they just weren't. It was being picked apart almost as soon as it was coming up, and I think the thing that kind of set that up was the so-called apprehension and killing of Osama bin Laden and all of the fishy things that surrounded that. I think that was so high profile, people started digging into it, and you kind of could see that story collapsing almost as soon as it began to be reported.
Well, they murdered somebody.
Yeah, they murdered somebody,
but it wasn't.
I'm with you. I don't think it was Osama bin Laden.
Right.
There were earlier reports of his death after 9/11, so something very fishy there. But whether it was him or it wasn't him, the whole thing it had too much of an odor about it.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the prologue to the recent collapse that we've seen in their ability to execute the same old schemes.
Goody, goody, goody.
Yeah, well, goody, goody.
Yeah. Yeah. Save lives.